Thank you, everybody, for attending today's session. Arctic IT and Microsoft are partnering with us today again for the third of their four-part series called The Road to TribalNet. Today's presentation will be titled Staying One Step Ahead of a Breach, which is very timely at the moment. Joining us today are Dave Bailey, who's here now from Arctic IT, and Brian Jameson from Microsoft will be jumping on here shortly. Dave is the president of Arctic IT and recently spoke at our virtual cybersecurity event, which hopefully some of you were able to attend. And Brian works with Microsoft and is a cybersecurity compliance specialist for the federal government sector. So two guys who really know what they're talking about and can give us some good insight on this topic. So let's get started. If anybody has questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat and we will get to those at the end of the session. All right, I'll send it over to you, Dave.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Can you see my screen?
Sure can.
All right, very good. Well, welcome everybody. Let's talk about staying one step ahead of a breach. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some modern security challenges, and that word modern has evolved even in and of itself. Building a zero trust foundation. And then we'll talk about a solution with Microsoft 365, and then how Microsoft's products and cloud environment, along with services from a partner like Arctic IT, can help you get ahead of some of those challenges you might be having. And we'll talk about what we call cloud managed services and security, and then hopefully have some time for questions. So modern security challenges. Every day we hear some new news story about some of the things that we face from an industry perspective, whether it's the government, foreign countries trying to get into our environments, our industries, trade secrets, personal information, you name it. But some of the other aspects of that have evolved as well. For example, where we work, the tools that we use, how we do our work, whether it's virtual, physical, a collaborative type environment, and the data that we share has even grown and expanded over time. So these risks continue to evolve. And one of the key elements that we look at today is a zero trust framework and a position of what we call assume breach. So verifying explicitly who, what, where, and when we're allowing into our environment, using the principle of least privilege access, and assume breach. In other words, if someone was already inside our environment, what are we doing to protect the information that we do not want them to get access to? And more importantly, what do we want to allow access to? So when we talk about a foundation for zero trust, most of the time, to just break it down into simple aspects, we're referring to identities and endpoints, noting that some people may have more than one endpoint in our environment. They need to come through and do their work. Some people might have more than one identity, depending upon their role that they're occupying at that time. And then we have the other side of the equation where we're trying to protect the data, the applications, the infrastructure, and the network as four main components that we're trying to secure. So as we talk about this, today, 80% of the breaches that we see involve the use of lost or stolen passwords, credentials. Credential harvesting, privilege escalation inside people's environments are still a large proponent of how people are able to get into a breach situation or get that information. The bigger challenge, however, is 60% of bring your own devices are not actually secured by IT. So you have competing challenges where it's not just the identity, it's the device itself. So as we look at a zero trust foundation, there's really four key areas that we want to put in place, and there's a gradual way to get that done. And like any other good security approach, it's done in layers, and there's multiple options, there's multiple products. We're trying to make sense of some of that today with Brian's help from Microsoft. So we want to talk about modernizing identity and endpoint management, securing the hybrid workforce, transform employee experiences, because we all know that it can be frustrating sometimes depending on how many security tools we have to go through to get our job done. And then we want to customize secure access for all those user types. So let's start with modernizing the endpoint, okay? So when we look at 81% of business leaders state that they feel pressure to lower security costs, some of us in the industry would say, well, no kidding, right? We expect that we want to lower the cost of security. And really, when we look at the broad number of tools that we have and the layers that we've accumulated now in our security posture, it's a time to start peeling back those layers and figuring out how much redundancy do we need and how can we make IT more efficient while remaining more secure at the same time. So that's a process that you have to go through on a continual basis as it evolves. It's not something that you get done and you check the box and you don't have to look at it again. So one of the key issues that we address in a zero trust position is looking at identities. Azure Active Directory is one of those key aspects that we use in all of the clients that we work with to manage that identity. Authentication, blocking legacy authentication, and on-premise identities are three areas that we can use Active Directory to manage from an identity perspective. Additionally, when we look at the devices, we have something called Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Now, you may remember System Center, and you may remember something called Intune, which is sitting right here inside the picture. That has evolved as well. When Microsoft looked at the number of devices that people were showing up with one identity, managing those endpoints became a critical component. And it didn't matter if you weren't on the Microsoft platform. As you can see, Apple, Droid, Microsoft, all those devices need to be secured in a similar fashion. So as we look at both Active Directory and Microsoft Endpoint Manager, then we start looking at the applications and how we get into those things, whether they're on-premise or they're in the cloud. Moving those apps in a secure cloud environment is something that everybody should typically have a project right now in their hands where they're trying to move something to the cloud. But the identity has to remain that constant thing that we manage from a zero trust perspective. So when we look at business leaders, typically on where they feel that their risks are increasing, needless to say, cybersecurity is one of the biggest things. Some of us probably have security or cyber insurance policies. Over the past few years, those policies have crept up in cost. Many of the folks that we work with over the past year, they've seen their cybersecurity insurance costs more than double. So remote access is one of the things that has caused that cost to go up because the risk of breach seems to have increased. Now, it's all done on precedent. So there's plenty of industry precedent to say these costs are going to continue to go up. So how do we mitigate costs where we can? So verifying identities with strong authentication is one of the key first steps that we push everybody to. If you're not using multi-factor authentication today inside your environment, even mid-session, I would tell you to drop from this call and go put that in place at all costs. It's estimated that just using multi-factor authentication can stop 99.9% of identity attacks inside your environment. So to not have that in place right now would be severely behind the curve. Additionally, you can look at doing passwordless technology. Some of us might be using Windows Hello. Like, for example, today when I got on my computer, I sat down in front of it, it recognized my face, and I was able to log in. So I didn't need to put in my password to authenticate, okay? And then we have to look at the device side, right? So when we start thinking about all the different devices that are out there, we want to make sure that those devices are protected as well. Good operating system, it's patched, it's up to date, it has all the right policies in place. We're managing that from a cloud down perspective. We're making sure that devices that haven't checked in a while are excluded from being able to log onto the network, forcing that resource that's remote to actually log onto the network and get their device up to speed. We see that quite a bit. And then we have adaptive access policies that start to bring us into that zero trust foundation where we're looking at the controls for how much access we want to allow, the hours of access, the countries of access that we want to allow access from, forcing password resets, requiring multi-factor authentication. All of these things go to support what we call a zero trust policy. And they're all possible inside that Microsoft 365 framework, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. By putting these in place, you're reducing sign-in risk. You're making sure that the different places that maybe it's impossible for a person to be in two places at one time is prevented just from a policy perspective alone. And then resources with what we call access lifecycle management. So policy and role management, automated reporting with alerts, detailed audit logs, provisioning, access request management, and entitlement management are all something that can be done inside Azure AD. A lot of us might have different applications that we use in different silos of our business to do that, but it makes it very difficult to have a cohesive approach to managing that life cycle of how those policies get applied, and more importantly, how you're auditing them to make sure that they're being followed, and where you have trouble with an end user or a group of users that can't get access to what they need. You have to be able to have someone that keeps their eyes on that so that it is more cost effective for them to use the tools and the security they need to stay involved with the business, whether they're in the office, whether they're out remote, whether they're on a client site, no matter where they are, make sure that these things are staying up to date. A lot of the folks that we work with get this stuff in place, and it's a challenge as it evolves to keep it up to date. So Azure AD provides a way to keep all that in one place and look at it, and believe it or not, monitor it and see how it evolves over time. And that brings me to the next challenge, and that's the employee experience. As we look to put some of these security controls in place, for example, multi-factor authentication. When we first put that out there for a lot of our users, they were not necessarily happy with the fact that now they got to go through an additional step to put in a code or respond yes or use a fingerprint to log in. And even multi-factor authentication has improved quite a bit as far as how you can do it to limit the amount of fatigue that someone has in going through these challenges. Almost half of the remote workers that are out there in the workforce right now say that when there's issues with access to different informations or challenges, it takes it a long time for them to get fixed. So how do you speed up that process to make sure that the employee experience is not also a security challenge? And most people don't think about it that way. So if the employee isn't having a good experience with accessing that information, that in itself becomes a security challenge because they get fatigued with all the asks. So how do you make sure that that is sped up and it's efficient for them as well? So just having your face as a way to log on to your computer with Windows Hello, that's a huge advantage. We rolled that out to our organization, and people were extremely happy without having to do an extra hop with a password or something to that effect to log into their computer. Right? Single sign-on. Many of us have had adopted third-party single sign-on technologies prior to Microsoft embedding that inside their practice. But now with single sign-on, we don't have to, use separate different user ID and passwords and identity to go through all those different toll gates, right? So there's a big advantage there from an end user experience to enable single sign-on. And then managing your own identity, right? So if I don't have to engage with a support desk to either reset a password or change a multi-factor authentication phone number for a text message or something like that, and I can do that with my own identity securely, that takes a tremendous burden off the help desk, and it makes the employee have a much better experience as well. And then if we have partners that we have to do business with from a business to business perspective, we can use some of those similar IDs, again, so we have a single sign-on or a single identity to step through the different relationships we might have to conduct our business. It also improves our security footprint because we're not managing multiple identities at a greater risk. When we get into some of the healthcare professionals that we work with, social services, platforms, casinos that we deal with quite a bit, 75% of those frontline workers, they don't feel like they have the tools to do their jobs effectively, whether it's a challenge with technology or they just don't feel like things are automated enough. One of the key things we can do in identity and device management is speed up that process while improving the security at the same time. So when we look at a device that we're going to actually log inside Azure AD as an approved device or in Microsoft's Endpoint Manager, that provides a huge advantage to us from an IT and security perspective as professionals, right? Because we get to see that device 9 times out of 10 now, the phone is a BYOD device. So we have to have a way to secure the information that's on it that has to deal with our enterprise, but still not inhibit the worker from using their device. So we can also share devices. In some cases, for example, if we have mobile devices out on the casino floor and we want to share those out to multiple people, we can do that as well by using that identity that moves with them despite the device that they might be on. And this is one of the key ones that we use quite a bit now, and that's Azure B2C, or business to customer. So if we want to allow our customer to do business with us, but we want to have a level of security that they otherwise wouldn't be able to manage on their own and still give them employee self-service or customer self-service, if you will, we can create a domain that is customer facing or business facing, and they can bring their own credential, whether it's from another identity access tool that they might use, whether it's Google or something to that effect, or they can create their own username and password in that customer facing identity that you yourself at the IT level have the way to manage. All right. And then when we look at that business risk by not having that in place, when we look at dynamics from a retail perspective, some of the large customers that we have use Dynamics 365 for commerce, and managing that authentication envelope for the identity for them to do business with you at either a business or a customer level is a huge advantage now that we have to help make sure that that customer has a repeatable, secure experience, and they feel confident without the risk of losing their information while they're doing business with you. So that Azure B2C is a huge tool that we start rolling out now with all of our business applications for our customers that want to do business with the public and want to control the security identity in which that occurs for them to be successful. So we talked about endpoint management, securing the hybrid workforce, and transforming that employee experience as a matter of implementing zero trust by doing a few key things: managing the endpoints, managing the identity, creating conditional access policies inside that cloud environment where all of your logins are going to be routed through, and then securing all the applications with that same identity and that same endpoint in the same tool so that I don't have to worry about the variables that not doing it that way can create and a challenge to our security posture. So what should be top of mind? Identities and endpoints, data, apps, infrastructure, and network. Everything that's in between is what your zero trust policy will embrace. One of the tools you heard me use is Microsoft 365. And Microsoft 365 had its own evolution here over the past few years. If you remember Office 365, and then we had the operating system Windows 10, and managing that securely in one place with the relationship with the identity and the device was a challenge for us in the IT space. Not just from an operational perspective, but from a licensing perspective as well. Microsoft 365 helped us, one, from a licensing perspective, put that into one SKU, right? So that we could say, okay, I have one part number that's going to get me everything I need inside that stack for the end user to have a secure relationship with the tools and technology that it needed in the cloud. But at the same time, I now have the operating system, the versioning, the patches, the updates, and all the security that surrounds that identity and device managed in that same console. So if you've never seen it laid out this way, this is a really nice slide to understand Microsoft 365 and what the product actually means. Office 365 and all the applications that you expect, advanced security features that are there, and then device management capability inside the operating system to help manage that process as well. This is a nice list that we put together that basically shows you what we call the standard for Microsoft 365 at an enterprise level, which represents most of you on the call, Microsoft 365 Enterprise 3 license. So this shows you the different components that it includes as a feature name, what's included with that, and then a checkbox to show you what's there, either built into the E3 license or some of the additional things that we might add depending on the size of your enterprise and your requirements. And one of the biggest aspects that I want to touch on as we get ready to transfer the presentation to Brian here is that the biggest aspect is security at scale. When we look at even some of the largest enterprises we work with and the sheer list of products that they have out there in the security space to help them be successful. In many cases, if they have, let's say, 1,000 to 2,000 employees, They will have anywhere from 100 to 200 different separate products, tools, and devices in their environments, separate manufacturers in some cases as well, across their hardware stack, just to be secure. And these things have been added over time as their security posture has evolved and the challenges have evolved. But now it's gotten so complex that moving it to keep up with the scale of security risk that's increased, it's almost impossible. So one of the nice things about leveraging that Microsoft 365 security environment is you do actually get what's called security at scale. It would be foolish to assume that you could impart enough security to compete with Microsoft's layers over your information inside that cloud environment. It doesn't displace your need for your own endpoint security, your own technology, and having that expertise and knowledge. But security at scale, in other words, the ability to inherit the controls and security from those subscriptions that you get out of that investment, that's a huge position to factor into your security posture as you're looking to build out capability and also keep up with the risk and stay ahead of it. So one of the things that we'll talk a little bit more about here is the details and some examples of all those pieces and moving parts that Microsoft 365 helps manage. And with that, I'll introduce Brian Jameson from Microsoft. So Brian, you can go ahead and present.
Excellent. Well, first I'd like to say I'm very grateful and thankful to you guys for allowing me to speak to you today about something that's near and dear to me, and I really enjoy helping our customers achieve their best security and match their objectives when it comes to security. And so Dave really brought up and mentioned the core as I get into these slides of what everything in Microsoft 365 is built around, and that is the identity. And so as I walk you through the pieces of Microsoft 365 security and the different columns and that we have, the theme I'm hoping that you'll pick up on is the fact that everything is centered around the identity. And that's how we can trace the action from going to a document that's classified, or if you're doing some activity in the cloud realm or in your endpoint, we map it all to the identity. And so as you can see here on this initial screen, we cover our security. Our Microsoft 365 Defender is automated across these domains that you see here, from user data to cloud apps, the endpoint, and identities. Now, some of you may have known these names as other names before, and we're kind of rebranding as you may to make things hopefully clearer. But it went from Azure Advanced Threat Protection to Defender for Identity. And as you can see the Defender theme throughout: Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365, and then Cloud App Security has always remained Cloud App Security. And so within Defender, right, there is some advantages to having your security under one umbrella here. And that is that you get one portal to kind of look at what's happening across that landscape. And that's throughout your entire Microsoft 365 landscape. We have coordinated activity protection from threats. We have a layer of orchestration where we can take alerts and say, well, this alert in Office and this alert on some data points. And oh, by the way, these 5 alerts on the endpoint all belong together. And we correlate that for you and coordinate that activity for you. We have a sense of automatic healing. We have unified threat and intelligence and analytics, where we look at it again as a holistic pair across Microsoft 365. And then we allow for hunting. And so if you're looking for activity, or you're looking for IOCs within your environment, you can hunt across our Microsoft 365 environment. That's very key. And another theme I want everyone to think about as we're going through this is a built-in approach versus a bolted-on approach. And that's what M365 brings to the table, that built-in approach to security and holistic view on how we do things. So this is the classic, and we'll pause here for a second. This is a classic attack chain that most of us, and if you've been looking in the paper or doing your research, most attacks typically follow this chain. There is some level on the left there of a phishing or browsing to a website or some attachment that opens. And as we move from left to right, there's some level of exploitation and command and control on your endpoint. at which point, moving in the middle here, your bad actor will try to gain access to your credentials. Once that happens, there's some lateral movement on your domain controllers. There's recon and collection of sensitive data that attempts to be happen at that point, owning your domain. And then finally, at the top right there, the exfiltration of data, which is the crown jewel. This is you look at SolarGate, you name the attack, they pretty much follow this model. So when you think about M365 security, and we can go ahead and progress through the slides now, we have it covered throughout the chain, the attack chain here, right? And that's the key, that's the benefit. And so when you talk about phishing or attachments or emails, that's all on the Defender for Office umbrella. We share that telemetry. We not only share within that Defender for Office realm that you see there, but if something's happening from Brian's account, he's opening up attachments, or he's clicked on a phishing email, we share that telemetry, for instance, with Cloud App Security or things that you're doing with Defender for Identity. We know now that your identity perhaps is at a higher risk. And so as we move forward, Defender for Endpoint in the blue there, we have you covered on your endpoints. We have an AV and EDR solution on your endpoint. In the cloud, if we're looking across the cloud worldwide, right, we have our Azure AD identity protection, looking to see if any of your users' accounts have been compromised or stolen and used in other breaches throughout the world. Even on-prem, and this again is where that holistic approach comes into play. On your domain controllers, we can look for lateral movement. We can look for DDoS. We can look for various attacks that may be happening on-prem. And again, share it with this entire infrastructure. And then finally, in the top right there, Microsoft Cloud App Security, we have you covered from modern app and SaaS application perspective. And so as you're connecting up perhaps to other clouds, to other application resources, we can monitor what's happening. For the example I always give here is if Brian is, from a behavior analysis perspective, Brian always uploads about 5 megabytes of data to and from certain SaaS application or cloud application on a daily basis. And this morning, he's already up to 20 gigabyte, right? That behavior analysis will kick off. Microsoft Cloud App Security will shut that behavior down and report it to his identity. Brian's identity is at a higher risk, and it ripples throughout the entire infrastructure that you see here. That's that collaborative, holistic approach. And then finally, we have Azure Sentinel. We have to coordinate all the data, and including ingesting data from across your landscape. And not to forget, we also have insider risk management. That's part of what we offer there. And that's often the one that's left out. We all think external threats, but the insider risk management is a key component to our holistic security approach. So we wanted to show you just a quick example here on how this would work, right? A user, for whatever reason, opens a bad attachment from a personal email or inserts a USB, and of course, the machine will get malicious payload and it's in a bad state. Now, in this holistic security approach with M365, once we recognize, and we being Defender for Endpoint recognizes that that machine is in a bad state, we will send out the notification to the rest of the connected security infrastructure and say, disable this user's access to everything that user has access to, as long as they're coming from this machine. Milliseconds. We progress here in the slide. Now Defender for Endpoints remediates that particular device. But not only that device, if you have 10,000 devices that are connected to your organization, it will remediate all 10,000 devices now that it knows about that binary. It shares that intelligence with its Microsoft Intelligent Security Graph. And because your organization is running Defender for Office, it then could block that same binary, even though it came in from a personal mailbox, from all 10,000 of your mailboxes. Again, all happen in milliseconds. Even if the mail has already been delivered to the mailbox, it can retroactively remove that message from your user's mailbox. Now let's pop out and see what happened during that disable the user's access. So while that device was in a bad state, Defender for Endpoint, because it's connected and integrated, it will notify Intune and Azure Active Directory. Dave mentioned Azure Active Directory being the hub of decision-making there. it will then, Azure Active Directory, say, okay, based off of my conditional access policies, I'm going to restrict Brian's access to all the locations he has access to as long as he's coming from that machine. The minute Defender for Endpoint remediates that machine, in milliseconds, Intune and Azure AD will send out the signal, say, okay, great, machine is now remediated. In milliseconds, with zero touch from an administrator, we will now restore Brian's access. And that's that connected approach, helping your security staff work through these issues with minimum touch so that they can focus on some of the more advanced level threats that come into the organization.
Brian, I want to touch on one thing that you just said there, because that's a huge advantage when we talk about security at scale. And that those few slides just really help clarify what that actually means. The key thing you said is that it helps your security staff respond to that issue and move through the process of getting either the application, the access, or the user restored. The challenge is that if you didn't have all that in place, and you look at the traditional way many of the folks that we step into and start working with, they're trying to do that with the human capital and the resources and tools that are all striated and not connected together, and they can't do it as fast as they need to. So it's that time to get you back into an active state. So if you think about the triangle, right? Confidentiality, availability, and integrity, right? And it's a big challenge there to have that happen fast enough. So one of the cool things we see is this tool set being able to help the security team and the IT team and the client base move through that stuff significantly faster than they ever have before because of the connected nature in which it progresses.
Excellent point, Dave. Excellent point. Now, this one is a busy slide, but I really wanted to show you the end state here, because this is key. As Dave is mentioning here, we offer Microsoft 365 along with some of the additional Azure Defender and Azure Sentinel. We offer the capability to get your organization to a modern security operations architecture. This is where we introduce the XDR layer, not a Microsoft term, it's an industry term. The ability for your analysts and hunters to have deep, actionable insights based off of all the telemetry that you see at the bottom there. We offer the ability to have our Microsoft Threat Intelligence, where we get 8 trillion plus signals a day that come in that we give to you as an organization a leg up on insights and IOCs that may come in. We give the capability now for SOAR, so automated response and remediation. Again, Dave mentioned it beautifully, right? Giving you the ability, no matter how small your staff is, right? Once you can get this up and running, to help you respond to threats in a timely manner. And then finally, in the top left there, Azure Sentinel as the SIEM, right? Can work in conjunction with what you currently have or some other mode, but it offers you that machine learning, the AI, the behavior analytics outside of Microsoft. So you think Google, AWS, anything that you're currently working with, we can ingest that in Azure Sentinel and then send it through the pipeline. Now, this is a lift. There's make no mistake about it. With this technology, and we offer it in holistic scale, it is a lift. And I think this is where Dave and team really comes in to help you weed through this journey, prioritize, and get it implemented. And with that, Dave, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Brian. Very well. So we've talked about Microsoft, we've talked about Arctic IT. Let's give you a little bit more information about Arctic IT and how we can help deliver that. One thing that Brian and I hopefully leave you with as you leave the session today is it's almost impossible for even the largest organizations we work with to move fast enough into a better security posture to leverage all these things at once and figure out how to maximize that investment in their IT security, but at the same time remain nimble enough to move with the enterprise as its business evolves, or even from a government and compliance perspective. Some of us might on the call today might even be in the government contracting space, right? How do we prep for something like CMMC and the certification requirements that that's going to mean to do business with the federal government? To inherit the controls from Microsoft is one thing, but to be able to have a response and administration type environment in place, just the resources alone to take advantage of that, you're not going to do it with less people. So neither Brian or I are saying that you're going to have a better security experience with less people. What we are saying is that with some newer technology and maybe some assistance from a third party, like a partner like us or someone that you might already have in place, you will be able to move quicker if you put some of these things in. And most importantly, inherit the controls that you get from those products and things that they put in place, learn from them, expand from them. So when we talk to you about business, we've been working with tribal organizations for near 20 years now. We work all across the United States, different types of enterprise, different types of government, both in the federal, state, and local and tribal space. And we do specialize in technology for tribal governments and casinos. This is one of the reasons we got into the security and the cloud space for identity and the Microsoft 365 managed services that we offer, which we'll talk to you a little bit about here, is that many of the business applications we put in, we were able to witness just the sheer amount of work that the IT teams in our tribal customers had, that they just could not respond fast enough to the stuff that was being pressed upon them. Many of them started asking us to get more involved with their cloud adoption strategy, their overall cloud security, and how that would evolve for them through both, tribal legislation and the challenges with the cloud over the past few years. So we've been fortunate with a partner like Microsoft to help, get rid of some of those boundaries for tribes being able to use the cloud and get themselves into a more secure position. And of course, we are 100% native owned. Doyon Limited is our parent company, and that's an Alaska Native corporation. So this is just one of our clients from Mille Corporate Ventures, moving their IT administration of a lot of their cloud environment over to us, help them take advantage of moving into that quicker. And it's also helped them figure out what kind of resources they need across their enterprise to maintain that security posture and take bigger advantage of the cloud. So we evolve our relationship with them as they grow and move into different types of business and expand. So here's just some statistics for you to understand where Microsoft fits into the tribal enterprise. There are 298 tribal tenants in the cloud. Some of those tenants are maybe a few for the same tribal organization, maybe for their enterprise, maybe for their health center, maybe for their tribal government. That might be 3 separate tenants, right? But quite a big footprint. If you go back, 5, 6, 7 years ago, that was a much smaller number. So the past few years have really accelerated that adoption of the cloud as a more secure way to do business. 78,000 tribal employees on Microsoft 365 E3. 50,000 have what they call the M365 E5. And that's another layer that also includes telephony through Teams and a couple other features as well. And then there are 5,000 tribal employees specifically on the E5, which includes that calling plan. So when you look at the sheer number of folks out there in Indian country using this technology, it's not everybody, but it is a massive jump and what makes us very happy is to see the advance in the security posture of all these organizations. Last year, we saw quite a few tribes get hit with some pretty big security challenges. So what that has helped us do is bring to market what we used to do just specifically in the commercial sector for customers. We've now brought that into our tribal business as well. So ArcticCare 365 is a cloud managed services and security offering where we come in and we augment and help with your IT staff manage your Microsoft 365 environment, all your endpoints, your identities, and all the business applications that package offers. We help manage and support that with unlimited support throughout your enterprise. So you get the power of everything that Brian and I just talked about in Microsoft 365, and then you get the capabilities that the team at Arctic IT is able to provide to you. So as I mentioned, it's your leadership, your internal IT, and Arctic IT works inside that in concert with you, and it helps you to gain control of security and compliance, gives you a more predictable IT cost so that you can face these challenges with a little bit better understanding of cost and what to expect. Faster support for your end user, which is going to improve significantly that end user experience, right? And then time to focus on business objectives. constantly what we find when we work with our tribal customers is that they have to strategically pick what they're not going to work on today because another fire has popped up, either with a business application, a department, a program, a line of business. It's just an amazing challenge to manage all that. So if we can take some of the administrative burden off of that cloud services and manage that for our customer, in addition to the security, that helps them be more strategic on the business objectives that they have. So this is just a full circle approach at what the Microsoft 365 subscription provides. And then in addition to what that provides, our services put another layer of capability over that for that tribal environment. So whether it's support, productivity, security management, training and testing, which is a huge component of this. In other words, training the end users and testing those end users, making sure that they are always thinking about how they should respond to an email. Every organization has at least one person that'll click on anything. So we know who that person is most of the time. And we want to make sure that we're giving them the education they need to stay secure. Right? So when we look at the IT network and systems management, that monitoring, that last slide that Brian showed, one of the cool things about the new Microsoft 365 tools and the additional security tools that we put in place for our clients is it's not just about our cloud assets. It's also about our on-premise assets, everything we have inside that network environment. That's where Arctic IT can help leverage those tools, plug into those devices, and get one cohesive look at the posture we have from a security point of view to help you guys troubleshoot what you have in front of you. So if you're interested in learning more about Microsoft 365 and ArcticCare 365 and how we might be able to help the organization, you can get in touch with us at connect@arcticit.com, and we'll send you that. It'll be on the deck here as far as that email address. And we'll do a discovery workshop with you. This is complimentary, it's free of charge, where we'll talk to you about what kind of security approach and team you have. Does it make sense to look at Microsoft 365 and ArcticCare 365 to help you take advantage of it? And we'll work through that step process with you. Cost is always an element, so you want to be able to get that flushed out early on, and we'll help you determine what a good process and a good cost structure might look like to get you in a better spot, okay? So with that, if you would like to ask a few questions, we'd be happy to entertain that. Brian and I are on the call.
Guys, I actually had a couple of questions sent to me, so I'll just ask those right now.
Okay.
The first one was about staffing, which I think you kind of covered that a little bit at the end there. If you're having trouble staffing due to labor shortages, what can Arctic IT do to help now?
Yeah, that's a common one that we get. Thank you, Michelle. It's staffing and labor shortages, and not just specific to any industry right now. And I think for most people, it's not going to necessarily go away in the IT space. I think it's fair for us to say, and anybody that's on the call would acknowledge, getting qualified, certified, experienced IT resources in any business has been a challenge long prior to COVID, right? It kind of just accelerated the issue because there was a massive acceleration in the adoption of technologies in cloud, and that also changed the entire security space that wraps around it. So with those both happening at the same time, we find most of our organizations that we work with are at a bigger deficit for the help. So as an IT organization, that's all we have is IT people. We don't just have an IT department, although our internal IT wishes he had a couple more guys once in a while. But we're an entire army of IT folks, along with Microsoft as well. So you heard security at scale inside that Microsoft stack, but then Arctic IT gives you that human capability to extend your adoption and improve your security posture by using these tools. We basically add resources to your environment at a lower cost than you can do it yourself. It's the cost of the human capital that we try to add to our organizations that's also prohibitive. So we've come up with a cost-effective way where it's a good business for us. It's lucrative for us to help augment that IT space, but at the same time, we're able to do it for a lot less expensive than you could if you went to market to try to hire the same people to get that same feature and function. So it's not just what Arctic IT can do. it does require that investment in that Microsoft 365 environment and some of those security tools to help alleviate that labor crisis that I think we'll continue to face in this space.
The other question that I have, excuse me, is regarding safety of their network. So the question is, how can I explain to my leadership that our network will be safe if we allow people to access it from home?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there, and Brian, you can add to that as well. When we talk about the identity and the endpoint, right? The network is in between, right? So you have resources either Microsoft's cloud or on-premise, and we're going to say, and what we're telling you is that if you manage the identity and you take the position of what we call zero trust and an assumed breach, our goal typically when we're selling our services and the value of Microsoft 365 is we're telling leadership that the information that you're worried about maybe being leaked or being accessed, we're protecting that because we're using a principle of assumed breach. So if someone got in, what would they be able to take? What would they be able to get away with? How is it encrypted? How are our backups separated from the rest of the environment and encrypted? So if we had a situation, it's not going to put us down, right? So first, there's that aspect of it. It's the information that we're protecting. And then there's the identity. If you remember early on in the presentation, we talked about several key aspects: multi-factor authentication, endpoint management. And by putting those tools in place, a justification to leadership is to say, listen, we currently don't have the scale to manage all of that stuff and monitor it and watch it and protect it. So in addition to the resources we've always had, the Microsoft 365 environment plus the ArcticCare 365 team is helping us keep tabs on that so that if there is a situation, we are able to respond to it. And it's not if, it's when. I think one of the most transparent and responsible things you can do when you're talking to leadership about an investment in security is don't ever let them leave a conversation with the impression that you're 100% secure, because there is no such thing, but you are in a better position tomorrow than you were today if you make an investment like this and take some of these steps and move towards that zero trust. I don't know if you want to add some stuff, Brian.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. The thing that I will add there is it's an and proposition, not an or proposition, right? And so you take what you've gotten from your network and you segment it, and maybe there's VPN communication. There's all sorts of things that you can do. And then you use the word and zero trust. And we look at conditional access on every single request. We see if the user's identity is risky or the device is risky. And so if you apply what Dave said about zero trust and all the things that M365 brings to the table and what you're currently doing, you have not only bettered your approach to responding to risk, but you bolstered your security level to start with. So I think that's the key I would take away there. It's an and proposition.
Another question, Michelle?
That was all that I had sent to me.
Okay, well, very good. Well, I think with that, we'll say thank you. If you have any questions about the information you saw today, or would like some of the content to help share that message with your leadership, or you would like Brian and I and some members of Arctic IT and Microsoft to help speak to your leadership about some of these opportunities, you have our contact information. You should know where to find us. We're happy to do that. That's what we spend our time doing. That's what we get paid to do, is help engage your leadership in some of the tough decisions and investments you have to make to handle your commitment to making the organization more secure. So I think we're all pretty excited about seeing everybody at TribalNet, coming up here in a few weeks. So Brian, I'll let you say a couple closing words.
Yeah, I echo what you're saying, Dave. On behalf of Microsoft, again, we're grateful to be part of this opportunity to share some of the good things that we're doing with Arctic IT, some of the goodness out of M365, and we're here. We're here to help you in your journey. We do a lot with Arctic IT and Dave and team, and you're not in this alone. We're here to help, and I can't wait to meet a lot of you during TribalNet.
Yeah, we're also thankful to the folks at Tribal Hub up for putting this together. I think one of the coolest things about it is the fact that we have peers in all different aspects of business that we try to do in Indian country. And if you haven't made the trip to TribalNet in the past, and this is one of the first sessions you're attending for Tribal Hub, don't miss it. It's a great event to network with peers, build some relationships that help you gain momentum in some of the initiatives you have. And no such thing as a bad question at TribalNet, right? So we look forward to seeing everybody there. And thank you to the folks at Tribal Hub for giving us the opportunity to speak to you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one more thing before we go, just a reminder that the fourth and final webinar presented by Arctic IT will be on October 28th at 1 p.m. And that will be discussing the future of tribal community services, tribal platforms 4.0 cloud application presented by, I don't know, are you speaking, Dave, at that one or another?
They might give me a small time to speak, but we have we have some folks that are going to be leading that presentation that are do a lot of the hands-on work for deploying that tech for tribes. So I might have a cameo.
Awesome. And you can find all of that information on TribalWise.com. You'll be able to register there. If anybody has questions after the webinar concludes, or you'd like to get in touch with Dave or Brian and you forget their email, you can always email us here at contactus@tribalhub.com. And this webinar will also be posted on TribalWise.com under our previous webinars. So you can go back and rewatch it or share it with your colleagues if you'd like. And with that, I will end this presentation. And thanks to everybody for attending. And thanks to Dave and Brian for coming on today.
All right, take care, everyone. See you soon.
Take care.